Good evening. We are going to begin another video series on the idea of God. Then, after this, I think you can suggest the topics you might wish for us to do. We'll be doing at least 2 videos on a single topic, and that should be about it. I can be recycling the topics over time, but for now, I think I'm beyond the first stage of doing videos, which is just trying to learn how to press record as often as possible, or as people say, once a week, if if at all. Today was a slightly nervous day. I could not record videos. I could not record a video as early as I wanted to. Hence the need to use the artificial light. I usually seem paler when I use this. So my aversion to the usage of the same. But today I was scared, I was nervous. It's shameful not to do what you're used to in the appropriate time. But that's about it. I will talk about the idea of God for the next few weeks or videos, and we'll know about the advantage of that or the disadvantage of knowing that there's God and the implications. So, to me, God is the creator of all, the sustainer of all, the one who, from whom we borrow all we do, from our speech, from our intellect, from the gift of association, friendships, even the ability to make videos themselves. So, God to me is the originator and the end of all things. I think that is majorly Christian, and I am going to use that. First of all, many people think that being being an antichrist means being against Christ. While that is true in the English version, actually antichrist from the Greek and Latin roots from which we derive the name actually means someone in the place of Christ. I was reading today about the first king of Israel, that is King Saul, and he was meant to be a vicegerent of God, that is a vicar of God, not someone who really occupies the place of God in heaven, but who occupies the place of God here on earth. And I think we see that most effectually in the life of David and other good kings of Israel, like Josiah and others of the kind. And then we see it when a king is in power and he leads others to evil, then he's a vicar of the devil. So someone can be an antichrist or even an anti-Satan or anti-Lucifer, not someone who is openly against God, but someone who is in the place of God. So the reformers of old actually came up with or concluded that the antichrist of this age is actually the Pope himself, or the papacy as a system. And I think that it's easy to prove that. We shall go into those topics over time. So God is the divine, our religious textbooks used to say the divine being, which I think it's sufficient. But God is one who is above all, in all, through all, not in a pantheistic way. God is not in this microphone. God created people and then let them be. That is, I think that is good. The deistic view is the belief that God created the world and then he forgot about it, went on his way, that is oblivious of all that goes on in our world today. From the book of Psalms, we know that there is nothing which you can do which God is not aware of. There are people who say that God is omnipresent. I don't really believe that is very correct. While God can observe all, I think he does that via the agency of the angels, because they are angels who are there wherever we go. I think God is in the temple, in the throne of heaven. While he can look through all, he's not everywhere present, especially for Christ. After he took up the nature of man, he remained that way forever. So he's not seated at the right hand of God, and then in the same way, he's in this country or that country is at one place at the same time. And from the biblical account, if I understand it correctly, the only few times of which God the Father was on earth was when at least he would communicate with Adam and Eve, and then on Mount Sinai, and then when Christ died. I think those are the times in which we are sure that God the Father was on earth. But other times we cannot really be sure about that. The God who gave the commandments on Mount Sinai was actually Jesus Christ, or the Son of God. Okay, so the idea of God. I was an atheist before, not that I was born one, but I grew up in a culture where people were hypocritical. So in a sense, I gave up on religion, not entirely dispensing with it, but holding it in contempt. Or I used to have these questions: if God is, then why? I think it was about the same time I lost some people I knew to diseases. And we can first of all begin here that choosing to sit in the sideline, that whether God is or is not, is actually choosing for the other side. Is God there? I think that's a good question. If you choose yes, then you have decided. If you choose no, then you have decided also. But if you choose not to choose, then you've already chosen and often for the other side. But I think, as usually say, God is merciful and all that. Which brings me to the other concept: is God innocuous? Is God unable to harm people, to harm beings? And I think the idea of a good God is what causes many of our problems. Is God so good that he will never punish sin? If that is the case, then that is weakness. That is not an all-powerful God. So a foundation of any government is actually based on law. And we know from the sanctuary, which we might discuss over time, the mercy seat actually was above the law, the Ten Commandments. So the establishment of the government of heaven, or of the divine government, is actually his law. And we know the law: have no other gods before me, do not kill, do not covet. All these laws, where we are told in the New Testament that covetousness is as idolatry, or as witchcraft. But I think these are things which we are trying to do away with to our own harm. Okay, so any prosperous society was actually deistic. They had a form of godliness. And any society which was on the descent, or which was failing, was actually atheistic. So the notion that we are freest when we are atheistic is actually inconsistent with history itself. All classical societies, all classical kingdoms, all classical empires were actually very religious, whether it was just in idolatry or some semi-partial belief in the God of heaven or the God of Israel, or at least believing in some deity, or even some, in the African culture, a multiplicity of divine beings. Then they needed that. There was law. There were always things which were considered moral and immoral, and these are the bases upon which the society was pegged upon. Okay, so what benefit is there to know that there is a God in heaven, or there is God? And I think our primary questions as human beings are usually: who am I? What am I supposed to do? What is my destiny? Where am I going? Okay, so when God is, then my beginning, the basis of my existence is clear. I was created, and then over the generations, here am I existing. Here I am existing. So according to the biblical narration of creation, the world is about 6,000 years old, and not more than that. But according to the theories of evolution and dating and all that, the world is more than 1 billion years old. There is this law of thermodynamics, I think it's the third law, which says that all matter tends towards entropy. So evolution says that if you leave this microphone for 1,000 years, you could get something better out of it. But science, which is basically the study of the creation of God, teaches that anything left over time actually tends to deteriorate. And we know from actually much of our media is actually biased towards one narrative. But that's not the only narrative. There have actually been bones which have been found, even the bone of Goliath himself with the skull, should I call it space, okay? And then there have been femurs which have been found to be more than 1 meter long, okay? The femur is the bone between the hip and the knee joint, which were more than 2 meters, 1 meter long, or even 2 meters long. So people estimate that the antediluvian generation was actually people who were very mighty. They had giant intellects and they could live for 900 years. So if our best of scientists just study for about 50 years, from their 20s to their 50s, and then they give us wonders of wonderful gleaning from the scientific world, how much more would they, who had studied one line of thought for 900 years, would give? And remember, these people always had contact with the entire human race was flourishing at the same time. So I could talk to someone who was 1,000 years old, and I could speak to someone who was 300 years old, and I could get all this knowledge at the same time. And in the time of Adam, people could speak to God and angels directly. Okay, and then they would glean wisdom from even plants themselves and the air and the water and all that. So believing that God is sets a very definite beginning for my life. And then also my destiny is also sorted. If I'm obedient, or if I profess faith in the Son of God, then I could be saved. And if I don't, then I'm lost forever. There are people who claim that these are bad arrangements, but there are things which are called philosophical impossibilities. The people say, if I was Adam, then I won't have fallen for the fruits. Okay? But for you, how many sins have you done yourself, despite knowing that these things are wrong in themselves? Sin is the transgression of the divine law. If there was any government which existed without the second part of the table of the law, the two tablets of the law, from the commandment 5 to commandment number 10, do not kill, do not commit adultery. If that never existed, then there will be no divorce laws, there will be no prisons for murderers. So can we do away with that law and then live in a perfect, flourishing society? Don't you need some sort of law to keep us at least respectful of each other? And then there's a humanistic approach that always assumes the best of humanity. And I think just a quick glance at history actually shows that human beings are evil. They can be very wicked. Okay, I think there's a Bible verse to support that. Jeremiah 17 verse 9, that our hearts are desperately wicked. Okay, we ourselves cannot even discern it. And I think the last century, the 20th century, with all the world wars and the despotism that was, actually show us that these things are very possible. People better than you have done crimes worse than you might ever imagine to do. Okay, so, and then the idea of duty and destiny. If God is, then there's such a thing as right and wrong. There are things which you're required to do by divine order. You have a responsibility to God, and you have a responsibility to other human beings. You need to be good, not out of your own account, but by the help of God via his angels. Okay, so that is the introduction to this, the idea of God and the implications of that. So we shall venture into this topic maybe next week or over time. Yeah, have a good week.